And John, we've got time if you want to kick it off.
No, I was gonna say, I feel like it's already like 10 minutes.
Okay.
Just not. Just not.
Well, welcome everybody. I'm glad you're here, both online and in person. My name is Stefanie Ashley, and I am joined by John Brent, who is off camera, but he will be on camera in just a minute. And we will do introductions in just a minute, so I will let him introduce himself too. John, if you don't care to go to the next, go 2 slides up. So a little bit of introduction about myself. I am with the Facilitation Center here on campus. We facilitate group meetings all across the country for all kinds of different reasons. We help groups have messy, complicated conversations or strategic conversations. And we also do a whole lot of DACUM occupational analysis. And it takes us across the country more than anything else. To the best of my knowledge, the only other university that offers DACUM services is the Ohio State University. There are some community colleges in Canada that do it, but it is one of the feathers in EKU's hat. And I don't know that most people know that it is a feather. So we're here to talk about it and how that works into competency-based learning and how that can be helpful. John, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name is John Brent. I'm in the Justice and Safety Department. I was first introduced to this process because I was going to work at the Department of Criminal Justice Training, and they were putting on an evaluation of their overall curriculum. And I contacted Stefanie's office to perform a job task analysis. And basically what that was going to do is it was going to go off in the field and talk to key stakeholders and people working in the field of law enforcement to kind of figure out what they do on a day-to-day basis, whether it be first line responders or supervisors, to kind of figure out what that critical list of job tasks were, and then back plan from there to figure out how well the academy was instructing its cadets to meet the job demands once people actually got out in the field. And then from there, I kind of got hooked ever since. And then I greedily wanted to be a part of this just primarily so I could learn more rather than participate. So I handed it back over.
Thank you. So I would love to, we don't have time to hear from everybody, but I would love to hear from a couple of volunteers that would both online and in person, that if you would share where you come from in the university and what brought you here today. That will help us customize what we share with you. Give me some idea of what's interesting to you about this topic. And then also that opening question. If you would give me an example of one ongoing job responsibility you have. In DACUM, we would call it a duty. So those ongoing responsibilities that never end that you have to perform or demonstrate in some way. So I'd love a volunteer.
Yeah, I can do it.
Thank you.
The Dean Stevich, Assistant Professor of Instructional Design. I'm interested in competency-based education. I'm aligning my own curriculum in instructional design with external competencies. But basically, there's about 150 competencies that make up the whole discipline. So I'm already doing that and trying to align it with the competency-based education and where do I go from here? So that's like a process for me for the next year or so or more.
Great.
And I already mentioned, preparing courses. That's my
Prepare courses. Yeah, a great example. It's ongoing. You never stop unless you retire. Right? And then you might not even stop.
Get in by car.
Thank you. Thank you for going first. How about online? Oh, good. I see something in the chat.
Dom Ashby, Department of English. I'm working with 2 colleagues to convert English 101, a CBE course. One ongoing responsibility is facilitating student discussions about course readings.
Yes, facilitating student discussions about course reading, ongoing. And that's another good example. If you think about that ongoing responsibility of facilitating that, there are going to be tasks associated with that and competence. Yeah. One more example. Somebody doesn't. What brought you here, and give me an example of an ongoing responsibility.
Well, I'll interrupt the silence then unless anybody comes off mute over there, but my name is Gil Hunter. I am in the English department and I also work for the provost part-time. And what brought me here was the provost asked me to lead a group this spring and then again a group in the coming fall, that will be converting courses to competency-based modality. And so we've got a group of about 8 or 9 really enthusiastic instructors. Dom is one of them, Nadeem is one of them, who are converting a course, and we'll have another cohort of that in the fall, so that by winter break, we will have, I'd say about 25 or close to 30 courses that live in a CBE modality, which is pretty exciting. Haven't reached any critical mass yet, but it moves us in a good direction. And then one thing I have to do, certainly, show up is one of the things, it's hard for me to attend virtually, not just these things, but my work, because I'm working with students every day, I'm working with colleagues every day, and it just happens in person better. So physical presence is one of those things I have to do every day.
Physical presence. And when you work with students, is there certain knowledge or skill that you need when you're working with those students when you show up?
Depends on the role. Certainly in English class, working with people who are going to be English teachers, there's certain skills, communication, for example, would be one of them. But then working in my other job as director of McNair Scholars, then helping with some goal setting, project management, time management, those skills are necessary. Mm-hmm.
Great example. And that is what we're going to talk about for the next 40 minutes. So if you don't mind to skip to the next PowerPoint, we are going to talk about occupational analysis that will get you to those competencies and ensure that they are accurate for what you're teaching, and also the possibility of looking into the future and what that job will be in the future, as far out as you can imagine, really. So there's lots of ways to do an occupational analysis. What we're going to talk about today is the small group method, DACUM. So if you flip to the next one. DACUM is a broad acronym. It stands for Developing a Curriculum, which is a systematic process, and it's unique in 3 ways, but it utilizes a focus group, and it uses high-performing incumbent workers who are actually doing the job. And they analyze their own jobs. So they capture, like the brief discussion we just had, they go through a facilitated process where we capture those ongoing responsibilities of their job. And then we break it down to what are the tasks when you're preparing for a course or preparing for a class. What are the tasks you do that are a part of that? And then we also dig into what are the knowledge and skills and maybe even traits that are associated with that. What do you need to be able to know? What do you need to be able to do? So if we go to the next one. So the 3 things about DACUM that we have found very effective and efficient, that make it different and effective and efficient in some of those other ways, is that the incumbent worker analyzes their own job. It is not the supervisor that says this is what they do. It is not the customer that says this is what they do. It's not somebody who used to do the job. It is the person actually doing the job, and that they are high performers. And it does go along with the philosophy that high performers know what they do. We use a modified brainstorming process that incorporates storyboards, so it's very visual, so that people can see those tasks and duties that they're identifying, and we can move them around as needed. And then the results are produced in a graphic format. So we can upload this in the chat for those of you online. I passed out a paper copy for those of you in person, and Tony's got one next to you too, if you want to look at it. This is one, it's a sample of a foster parent. And so I have always learned that you could analyze any job using the DACUM process. And so when I was asked to do it for a foster parent, I thought, well, this is really interesting. Can we really do it for a parent? And it's a job. And I think the participants did a really nice job. This was also, the date on it is November 2020. So we were still in the pandemic at that point, and we did it online, and they did a fantastic job. So this will give you an idea of how it's produced. You've got your duties on one side and the tasks that make it up. And then it's prioritized. And then on the back, and I'm gonna walk you through this in a little more detail, but you know, awesome, thank you. And then on the back, you've got knowledge, skills, strengths, supports, and other things. Yeah.
Quick question, is this aligned to some sort of standards by social work, or is that what they started off and they break it down, or they just,
They just told me what they did.
okay,
So if you go to the next example. And I'm gonna dig into that, in a minute.
sure.
But the reason why this modified, focus group works, because when you've got high performers, it's really hard for them to tell you what they do. So when you think about when you first started your job or any job, you don't even know the questions to ask yet. You are unconsciously incompetent at your job. You are incompetent because you don't know what your job is and you don't even know the questions to ask. As you progress, you are still incompetent in your job, but you're more conscious of what you don't know. I need to find out more about Banner, or I need to find out more about how budgets work, or whatever it is. You begin to learn and become conscious about it. And then you move into the point where you are consciously competent. Yes, I understand Banner. I understand that how the budget process works. I understand about preparing for classes. It was all theory until now, and now I've actually done it a couple of times, and I'm confident in this, and I know what needs to be done. But when you get high performers, they do it almost instinctively. They do their job almost instinctively. They don't have to think about it anymore. They are unconsciously competent in what they do. Therefore, asking them to put their job into a very linear fashion and break it down into detail becomes really difficult for them to do. And I can't tell you how many times I hear, oh my gosh, I haven't thought about how I do that in so long. Because they do it without thinking. So that's part of why this modified focus group format works so well for DACUM. That's the next one. I think it's a picture. So if you've worked with the facilitation center, you know we have a storyboard. It's a sticky wall where I just stick and you move around. We also have a digital version of that too, which makes this really impactful too. So the DACUM process, there are 5 steps. You don't necessarily have to do all 5, and you just want to be intentional about it. For example, I just did one DACUM for a position where there are only 8 of them in the whole state that do this job. So there was no way we could validate it. We could only do the initial 2-day panel. So we skipped the validation step, and then next week we're doing the management review. But I'm going to walk through each of these to give you an idea of what they look like and the 5 steps in the process. And as we go, give you some case studies along the way and how it relates back to the competency base. So the initial 2-day workshop, that is 2 days in person. You can also do it online. It's 2.5 days online. We do that now with groups that are more national, that we're pulling panelists from across the country, or even international. We have done this with a group in Asia. And so we worked 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. So it corresponded with their day, their normal day, because we want the panelists to be wide awake. And I was kind of curious, can I still do it? Can I still pull an all-nighter? I did. It took a lot of coughing, but I did. So you can do it online, which is more cost effective for sure. And it works really well. Like I said, the one for the foster parents was done online. But this is where expert workers tell you what they do. So if you'll flip to the next one. It is, we really encourage a diverse panel of workers, but they're all doing the same job. And that quality of the panel is the most important thing of the whole process, that you get the right people at the table. And 6 to 8 is a great number for this process. And to your point, Nidhi, we ask them to do no homework or no preparation. Do not bring your policy manual. We don't want supervisors in the room watching what they're saying, because we want the reality of what they do, not what they're supposed to do. We want the reality of what they do. So the diversity piece, that can be really critical in a lot of areas because you want diverse opinions. And that can be gender and ethnicity. It can also be location. It can also be size of facility. So if you are a law enforcement officer in Jackson, Kentucky, and Breathitt County, your job as a law enforcement officer likely looks very different than a law enforcement officer in Louisville. So in Jackson and Breathitt County, you're probably doing a lot of everything, but you're probably more specialized in Louisville. And we want both because they're both have the same title, but they're likely doing slightly different things. They're going to have some commonalities, but they're doing different things, and we want it all. How many people report to them, size of facility. So you want to think about the occupation itself, and you want that diversity. You really want the best of the best. You don't always get it. You don't always get it for a couple of reasons. One, like I said, the job we just did, there were only 8 of them. It's not like we could get the best of the best. They were really good, but you don't always get that. Sometimes you get what you get. And there are exceptions for jobs for the future. And we have gotten 4 requests for this in the last couple of months for people who are looking at jobs that are changing or jobs that don't exist yet, but they know they're coming. So, and some of this is stuff I don't understand. One is a software user group and business analyst, and that job is changing in part because of AI. There's a project management group that wants to do a certification related to artificial intelligence, and they want a DACUM on that, but nobody's really doing the job and nobody's certified in the way that they're looking at it. So in that case, you can't always get the high performers either. So you're modifying you're still using the same process, but you modify who you get to come in and share. They also need to be good at verbal communication skills so they can tell us what they do. And then all currently doing the same job, not somebody who used to do the job, because jobs change. And you used to do it that way doesn't mean you still do it anymore. And we want some competencies that you can make that are current. What you lead with in that initial panel is you get an occupational definition, so 1 sentence that defines the job broadly. And then you get duties prioritized by criticality. Those are those ongoing responsibilities. And we do a nominal ranking grid so that they have to force rank what's most critical of what they do. That helps for trainers or curriculum developers when you're thinking about pulling your competencies together. What's most critical then, as far as those ongoing responsibilities that you need to build into your curriculum? Prioritize tasks associated with each duty. So in preparing for courses or a class, there are tasks associated with that. We also prioritize those tasks as well. That is up to the client and what your needs are. Sometimes that's also by criticality. Sometimes it's where you're spending the most time. Sometimes what is it that a new worker needs to know versus a veteran worker? What is it that they need training? And we also have them prioritize knowledge and skills with the philosophy that those things you can teach. We also ask for traits, and our belief is that you can't really train traits. Those are the things that you might look for somebody who you want to employ, but if somebody's patient, can you train them to be more patient? If they're not patient, can you train them to be patient? It's hard. Over time, maybe you can learn to be more patient, or maybe you're less patient than you were when you were younger. But it's hard to train some of those things, but we still capture them because they're important when you think about high performers in the job. But we don't rank them because it doesn't really help you for training. So with the tasks, I mentioned with the duties, those are ongoing, those things that never stop. The tasks, we are really specific when we get this information. It has to be something that has a beginning and an end. So if you're preparing for a class, you probably have to create a syllabus that has a beginning and an ending. You create it, you edit it, you finish it, you use it for the whole semester. So that is a beginning and an end. 2 steps or more. So those of you that create a syllabus, does that take 2 steps or more? And would I see you do those steps? Because that's the other piece of this. It has to be observable. Something that I would see you do. Because you want to train someone to do this, and you want to be able to observe and measure, are they competent in doing this task? So it needs to be observable or measurable in some way. So I believe, when you are faculty, you look at student outcomes. And I would imagine that is a measure of success. Are your students doing what you've instructed them to do? That is a measure of success. For DACUM, it's not. Because you could be doing a fabulous job as faculty, and it still may not connect with them for whatever reason. And those are some variables you can't control. So I want to focus on what you do as faculty to be successful, not about the outcomes and what happens with the students. It's about what you do. And so the conversation keeps coming back to what is it that you do that leads to a product, service, or decision. Some other things that we can capture in addition to knowledge, skills, and traits. I'm going to touch on these a little more in just a second, but this gives you an idea. It's really whatever you need for your field, your industry. What are some other critical factors in addition to knowledge and skills? And we can usually capture those as well throughout the process. So a quick case study. We worked with, this was private industry. We worked with supervisors who supervised heavy equipment operators. So just thinking about supervising people who work in heavy equipment, what would you think would be an ongoing responsibility of what they do? Safety, absolutely. And so I don't know anything about heavy equipment operators and what they do, but I know a little, and I would think safety is part of that. And it absolutely was part of what they do, safety. It was also one of the most critical things they do. But one of the examples of why DACUM is so interesting is one of the tasks around safety was surprising to me, and it was surprising to the management review. And this was one of the tasks was maintaining positive mental health. Of employees. So when I was thinking safety of the job, they said, absolutely. There were a lot of things around safety that they do. For example, when they left their trailers, they were always in the proper PPE. But somebody was brave enough to mention this piece, and it really emerged as a valuable nugget in what they do. This was for corporate training. So one gentleman brought up, we get a variety of people operating heavy equipment. For whatever reason, they tend to have financial trouble. They tend to get into risky behavior, and they seem to have a lot of girlfriend trouble or boyfriend trouble. And that sometimes they show up to work and they are not in a good mental state. They've stayed up all night. Maybe they drank too much. Maybe they had a fight with the girlfriend. They threw all their stuff out. Maybe they're broke and they've been broke and they need their paycheck early. They're dealing with a lot. And I don't want to put somebody in $1 million piece of equipment that could kill somebody else, kill themselves, or do millions of dollars worth of damage. And the growing need we have for training in monitoring that mental health is imperative to what we do. And that was a surprise to everybody except those 6 to 8 candidates. And they all agreed it was a huge part of what they do for safety. So it's an example of why DACUM is so valuable. So step 2 is the validation, and just like it implies, you get another panel of 6 to 8 people. This time it doesn't take 2 days. It can be done in 1 day because they're validating the work of the prior group. So that's step 2. there are reasons to do this and reasons why you may not. If it's a really complicated position, maybe you need buy-in from a lot of people, maybe you didn't get a lot of diversity, maybe you thought the panel was good, but when they got there, it wasn't so great. So there are reasons, these are some reasons to do it. But again, some groups don't have the money to do it, to do the validation, to pull people off the line for another day. It's costing money to do it. So this is why we encourage it, but it's not always necessary. Then you do the management review, and that is where you bring in the supervisors usually, and you compare. So what the worker actually does and what they said they do, and what management thinks they do. And there are some additions and some conversations that happen. If you go to the next one, I want to share with you an example. So there's a lot of reasons to do this. That gap analysis is one. And the example I'll give you is we had an occupation that transported youth from one end of a state to another. And it was a very big state, and it took them 12 to 14 hours to get from one end of the state to the other. And they told us they were giving youth medication during the transport. In the management review, they said, no, they don't. They're not allowed to do that. It's against regulations. They're not trained to do that. We said, well, they may not supposed to be, but they are, because they know this youth needs their medication every 4 hours, every 8 hours, but by the time they get across state, it can take them up to 16 hours. If they're not doing it with every youth, but sometimes they do. And it ended up changing the regulation. And this person transporting the youth got the proper training, so they knew what to do. They knew about contraindications. They knew how to properly store the medication. They knew all of these things. But again, it was the beauty of, don't bring your manual. Don't bring me what you're supposed to do. I want to know what you really do. Another example. So we do this a lot, the DACUM process a lot for community colleges. And this is an example of when we didn't necessarily ask for additional job requirements. We asked about physical requirements for cold plant manufacturing. They were warehousemen. It was in upstate New York, and it was a cold plant manufacturing, yogurt, ice cream, dairy products, things that had to be cold. And so we did the DACUM panel, the validation with warehousemen. We brought in and again, this was for community college. We brought in the management, and they were from competing organizations. They looked at the DACUM charts and they said, yeah, this is what they do. Yeah, I would say this priority is good. I'm a little surprised by the time spent here, this or that. Yeah, that's good. But you know, the students you send us, they have these things, but what we really need from you to employ these students is that when you start here, you're on the 6 a.m. shift. And so we get kids that come in that have graduated and they can't show up at 6 a.m. We need somebody that will show up at 6 a.m. The other piece is that they start with us and they don't like the cold. They get in these refrigeration units and they're in these cold plant manufacturing for 8 hours a day, and they don't like the cold. And so the discussion the community college had back from that management review is so our curriculum is solid, but how do we get our students prepared for 6 a.m. shift and used to the cold, or at least know that they want to do those things or don't want to do those things. And so the discussion was to have a couple of courses in refrigeration units. They have them there. So let's get them more used to the cold so they know this is for me or it's not for me. And let's see if we can find faculty that will start class at 6 a.m.
I really want to know the attendance class that's going to put you in a refrigerator at 6 o'clock.
I want to know who signed up to teach it.
The conversation when we left was, what they ended up with, I don't know. I don't know. But that is what they discussed at the time, because the employer said, yes, the curriculum is good, but I still need people that show up at 6 a.m. and they're used to the cold. So it's another example of why this process is really efficient and effective. So step 4 is a task analysis. And this is where you get into the nitty-gritty weeds of what somebody does. So when you maintain a positive mental health of employees, what are the steps that I would see you do? Because these need to be competency based so that I would know if you're doing it and you're doing it well. What are those steps? So if you go to the next one. This is where it really ties into the competencies because it's what they should be able to do as a result of their training or their curriculum. It is very detailed, and if you go to the next one, I'll give you some examples of how detailed. So what are the specific steps? Are they sequential? What's the performance standard? And again, it needs to be observable and measured. So one of the examples on the earlier slides was an ongoing responsibility if you have a car is maintaining your personal automobile. And one of the tasks would be wash car exterior. There are multiple steps in washing your car exterior. So you have to get your cleaning supplies. You have to position your car out of the sun or however you do it. And then the whole Karate Kid wash on, wax off, that whole thing piece. So there are steps. Performance standard. So what is your performance standard when you wash the car? If there are streaks on the windshield, is that acceptable? Is it that you use the special drying cloth and so that it's completely dry when you're finished? Whatever that is, the job task analysis gets to that. Necessary tools, equipment, and supplies. What do you need to be able to perform your job? Maybe you know how to do it, but you don't have the tools or the resources to do it. That's impacting your success. So we identify what those things are. So safety concerns. When you're washing your car, do you need to be worried about chemicals or anything that's in the cleaning products? Decision points. So at what point do you know you're done? At what point do you know you might need to change products because it's not working like you hoped it would? Errors. What if you realize you put the wax on the windshield? What do you do then? Because so far, all these steps are assuming it all went as planned. And we all know it doesn't always go as planned. Your intentions may be that it does this, but what if it doesn't play out like you thought it would? So what happens if there are errors, either of your own fault or somebody else's? What are some of those things that are going to impact your success? And then what do you do? What are those competencies? And some examples, so that's kind of where I stop, and I'm going to turn it over to John because you notice the fifth step is about the curriculum development. You take all of that information to then develop your curriculum. And that's usually where we stop. We leave all of this information with those that we're working with, and they then develop their curriculum. And this slide shows this process really works for any industry. These are the ones, just a sample of the different occupations we have done this for. And I don't know if it's Freudian or what, but after school care providers and correctional officers and jailers being right next to each other. But even physicians, we did this for general practitioners. We met in Dallas. They flew from all across the country. What are the duties and tasks, knowledge and skills of a general practitioner? The process worked beautifully for them as well as warehousemen and welders. It works for all occupations. So I want to give John a chance to talk about, so when you've got all this information, what do you do with it?
Yeah, so the way I understood this, everything that was said here is kind of way above my pay grade. So for me to like really break down what DACUM is and a job task, we have to go to these bullet points here. Hopefully you all can still hear me online. To give you a real hard example of what we're looking at.
John, make sure they can, because I don't know if you need this near you or not. I don't know if there's anything over there picking you up. Perfect. I'm just saying that.
Hey, Gil, we can't hear anything.
Can you hear me now?
There you go. Thank you.
Okay, perfect, perfect. So kind of recapping what I was just saying, a lot of people, when we look at this process, focus on the end state, right? Are you the good employee? Are you employer? Can you wash your car? Can you do this thing? And that's not really what this is about. What it's actually doing is it's breaking down the means, the skills, the knowledge, the capabilities that lead you to be able to wash the car, to be a good student, to be employee. So to give a quick example, are you all looking at a table online right now? Like, do you see a picture of a table? Perfect. I see a thumbs up. So when we first got our house, me and my wife, we wanted this really big farmhouse table, and we went to this place called Restoration Hardware. And if you've ever been there, you'll know that Restoration Hardware sells tables for like $5,000, and I was not about to do that. And over the years, I have grown my capacity to build things on my own, primarily because I just don't want to spend $5,000 on a table. So at the end of the day, I built a table that looks very, very similar to this. And one could say, hey, you can build tables, and that's the end state. But what this is actually doing is, if you were to look at this table, and you all can come off mute, just that way you don't overtype each other, just list some things that you think somebody would have to know how to do to build this table. And that goes for anybody in here as well.
Operate a saw.
You have to operate a saw, perfect. So when I went into this, I really thought you just kind of grabbed some wood and you slapped it together and that was it. And my first table didn't turn out well at all. It had like these little crumb catcher grooves on the top of the table where kids would drop food and they would get caught in a little ravine in these pieces of wood. My glue ups weren't good. The table was rocking back and forth. It was terrible. So at the end of the day, when we actually look at what is required to do something like this, we're going to go to look at these things. So like, what are the steps taken? You got to go get the wood. You got to be able to drive. You got to be able to find the right lumber. You got to be able to find kiln lumber. What are the necessary tools? Do you have a table saw? Do you have a chop saw? Do you have glue? Do you have a table to work on? Do you have stain? Do you have all the necessary equipment? Do you have eye gear? Do you have gloves? What are the safety concerns? Like, table saws can be very dangerous. If you've ever seen YouTube videos, don't go searching that. It can get pretty terrifying pretty quick. At what decision point? How do I know that the glue is dry? How do I know I've done something properly? How do I know that when my kids go to put their arms on the table that it's not going to fall over, kind of thing? So all of these things, when you break down what it takes to just build a table, to me, really simplifies what the DACUM process actually can do for us, right? It outlines the knowledge, skills, and capabilities needed to perform a certain duty, right? So when I look at everything that we've talked about, I'm going to pivot away from what we do as instructors to then refocus or reorient what DACUM and analyzing what students need to be able to do as far as competencies towards what employees are looking for. And as many of you probably know online, we're currently undergoing an assessment, if you will, of our general education, right? So I know the president's put together a work group of Essential Education Transformation Committee. And one of the things that one of the subgroup is doing is we're reaching out to stakeholders in the community. We're looking at employers and we're asking them what are very critical capabilities that students need to be able to perform when they leave the university. And I don't know if you can see the front of the room, but there are 10 essential employable skills that Kentucky's actually outlined, ranging from communication to be able to critical think, to be able to interact, adapt to changes, be professional, engage in civic engagement opportunities, to be able to collaborate. Now, as Stefanie talked about, a lot of these things we kind of take for granted, right? So like, what does it mean to be a professional? What does it mean to collaborate? What does it mean to be a good communicator, critical think? And what you'll find is when you look at employees, their definitions of these may change. And if that definition changes, we have to be aware of that, because the second that the definition changes, it's by default going to change the knowledge, skills, and capabilities need to be able to communicate effectively. I know if you were to ask me when I was in high school what an effective communication major would have been, it's you get in front of class and you talk to people face to face. But look at us now, we're on Zoom and we have text, we have social media that all factors into being a good communicator, which I don't have those capabilities. So If we needed to train me up to be a social media communicator, trust me, we would need more training than is probably present for me. So when we look at redoing essential education, it's going to require us to really take stock of what these capabilities are, what these essential employee capabilities that they're looking for get built into our curriculum development. And then if we take it a step down, how does general education foster that? And then the courses that nest within general education, and then your specific course. What does your student need to be able to do when they leave that course right into your syllabus development? What are the objectives that that class needs to meet to hit those essential employer skills? And then right down to your assessments. So what assignments are you giving them? What presentations are you giving them? How are they being assessed? Are there tests to actually objectively measure? Not are they going to be a good employee? Rather, again, can they do this specific capability? Can they communicate effectively? Can they adapt to a change? Can they make a decision point when a critical event happens? So one of the things I encourage myself to do, I don't know if it's going to be beneficial for you all, but after going through this process and hearing it and seeing it in like actually fold out the way it should, is to stop thinking about, hey, is my student going to be a well-equipped employee? The way I do that is not to think about them as the end state employee, but rather the degree to which our curriculum is developing very specific communication skills that are relatable to employees. How was my class preparing them to interact with others or to engage in quantitative reasoning? That way, when you put all of these things together within our general education framework, with the intent of if a general education is providing each piece separately, so that way when they come together, we actually do have a solid general education curriculum that speaks to the capabilities that are employer related and demanded. So that's kind of where I'm at with this, is just trying to figure out how to tangibly implement this into thinking through what our curriculum needs to be doing, not as far as the end state of the student, but the actual capabilities that we need to be fostering. So pending any questions for me, I'll turn it over to anybody in the room or online, or if there's anything else to add.
Lift up a couple of things. So Nadine, you mentioned you have 150 competencies that make up the discipline that you're teaching. So what DACUM does is help ensure you have an accurate, all-inclusive set of competencies. And so when you think about the competencies that you have, or if you don't have any competencies defined, either one, the DACUM process is helpful in defining what those are. And it's so flexible that you can customize it, so many of those factors that will be helpful for you as you develop your curriculum. We can find that out through the process. So because we're at EKU, we train everything that we do. So we have a DACUM facilitation workshop that we're going to do in the fall. So if you're interested in learning how to do this, to do it for your department, we will offer a training. We use a fishbowl technique. So we actually have a live panel of 6 to 8 high-performing workers in some industry that the trainees observe and see it happen in real time. Over the 2 days, it's a 3-day training. So 2 of that is spent with a panel. So we will have a session in the fall for training, but we'll also be looking for a panel, and we do it for free. So if you've got one that you need, we will need a panel where you need an occupational analysis. We will do it for free in the fall. So get in touch with me. Other than that, I'm open to questions. And
Shirley, you came off mute.
Oh, yeah, John, I thought you just made a really good point about our general education to be a springboard for, again, presentations. You know, one of the questions we always talk about, communication skills, where are they learning these? If we're using our gen ed to enhance what then professional programs are required of from an accreditation standpoint, we are going to have a more robust blend of gen ed into then the specialized learning. So I just wanted to compliment you on that. And I think we're going down the right fork in the road with this, so to speak.
Right, and I think the DACUM process provides us a tool. That way we can highlight kind of what's really needed, the employers, or what we need students to be equipped with when they leave. I think without this, I think we can theoretically talk about gen ed. It's kind of like, oh, well, we need to produce active civic members of society, well-developed students, so that when they leave, they're kind of prepared in general. But I think on top of that, there's ways of making gen ed a little bit more material for them to transition from college to being that employee, to being that well-versed citizen, if you will. And one of the ways that can happen is by identifying what these essential skills and capabilities, knowledge sets, and attributes need to be.
Any other questions or comments? We do have a sample job task analysis that we can upload in the chat too. And I passed it out for those of you in the room too, just so you can see an example of what that looks like. It's also very linear.
Hmm.
And now you can kind of see why it's so hard to get a panel of high-performing workers, because they are thinking about their job differently. And they have to lay it out a little differently than they've ever thought about it. But the end result is for a curriculum developer to use that information. And that's why there are some rules that are flexible and other things that are not, because at the end of the day, this is going to be used to develop a curriculum and you need certain things.
Use your file of job task analysis.
Yes.
We've uploaded that in the chat for everybody to review.
I don't have anything else if there aren't any other questions.
All right. Well, pending any of the other questions, we thank you for being here. And then if they want to get a hold of you, how?
I can put it in the chat, but it's Stefanie.ashley@eku.edu, Stephanie with an F, not a PH.
Right, what I'll do is before we actually sign off here, I'll put a link to the website and we'll get the contact information in case you want to lean on the dissent. You can go ahead and do that. I know it's been instrumental for various reasons to provide them, so I encourage you to do that.
Thank you all.
Yeah, okay, have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks.
I hope it was helpful. It was good to see you all. Thanks for coming up.
Absolutely, happy to do that. Yeah, no, I think about several audiences, you know, that it would fit well with, because I went to, you know, because I'm teaching a English 303 each fall. I teach English 303.